All right, we're live. Hi, everyone.
Great.
Welcome to Inner Join. This is a show where we dive deep into the world of data governance and data management. I'm your host, Shinji Kim, the founder and CEO of SelectStar. SelectStar is a data discovery and governance platform with an automated data catalog, leading edge, and documentation. So today, I'm very excited to have Jeff Rosen from Qbiz. Please comment on the chat if you have any questions for us during the show. And Jeff, welcome to Inner Join.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we've known each other for a couple of years now. Really excited to have you on the show. Please tell us a little bit more about yourself and Qbiz.
Sure. Well, let me just start quickly with Qbiz and get that obligatory out of the way. Qbiz is a boutique data consultancy. We're focused on data systems, data governance, advanced analytics, and AI. Over the last few years, we've really grown and invested a lot into our data governance practice. We work with a bunch of companies like Meta, Wells Fargo, Adobe, Levi Strauss, Mars, many others, designing and building data systems and data applications that help them enhance their product offerings, upgrade customer support, hire and manage employees, faster, improve marketing, streamline their supply chain inventory, and any number of other business imperatives. As the CEO of the company, I spend a lot of my time working with our customers and our consultants, ensuring that the projects that we deliver consistently exceed expectations and deliver business impact.
Cool. Lots of industry use cases. And more about you and how did you end up here?
Yeah. So to be honest, most of my career has been in data. I started in data around the mid-90s. First doing kind of some of the first data-driven content personalization, and then I moved into data and into like BI and advanced analytics. But back then we used to call DSS, decision support systems, and data mining. I worked with a lot of different companies like Visa Unlimited, Netflix, Google, among many others. Since then, I've worked at various software companies in the data space, both kind of advising and implementing data-driven systems across the world. I was doing a lot of traveling, working with a lot of different global organizations, and then probably it's been probably a little over 7 years ago. I had young kids and the travel was getting too much. And so a friend of mine that I'd worked with in the past brought me into to Qbiz and consulting. And I've just been loving working with clients and haven't really looked back since.
Amazing. Awesome. I know that Qbiz has this specialty. One of the things that you guys provide is more focused on data governance. So I know that you guys had a lot of this different programs that you have implemented in a number of companies. So I'm really excited to have you on the show to talk a little bit more about them, because we see a lot of data governance just kind of starting to emerge as the trend and topic in the zeitgeist with this new age of AI. Do you personally see more renewed interest in data governance, data catalogs, quality, more like related technologies and tooling? What do you personally think it's really driving the trend? Is it really just the AI usage? Are there anything else that you see?
Yeah. I'd say, we're seeing a huge resurgence here, especially over the last kind of 2 to 3 years. And I think there's a lot of different factors that are probably, causing this. AI, I think it's probably just the recent, but of course it's it's all in the zeitgeist. It's all in the news right now. And everyone's talking about it, but we can't also remember that, we've really had, accelerated by COVID, but, just consistently, we've had this trend of, more digitization across all aspects of modern day life and business. Everything now can be accessed over your mobile phone. And that means that there's a lot more systems out there and a lot more proliferation of more and more data and more complex data. And there's a lot of both internal and external systems. Managing and making sense of all that data has just been, it's become increasingly difficult, increasingly awkward, and it's really driven, I think, a lot of the focus on data governance. Now, as I mentioned, I started doing data in the 90s, and the late 90s, early aughts, was really kind of the beginnings of kind of the at least the term data governance, right? But back then, with some of those kind of early companies doing data governance products and data governance solutions, people like IBM, Informatica, those type of folks, it was really a top-down kind of compliance-driven command and control approach, right? This is how it's going to be, driven by IT, and what we've really seen over the last few years is data governance really being more of an enabler for the democratization of data. So, look, every organization, of course, has its own challenges and priorities. But when I think of, all the folks that we work with and talk to, we're seeing kind of data governance programs these days really focused on, really three main pillars or three main aspects, right? Compliance is still, a very important part of it. And especially with, a lot of the new, statutory and regulatory, laws and rules that have come out. Compliance is and, things around GDPR and privacy and, things are, compliance is still a very important part of it. However, the second pillar that we're seeing is really more about enablement. As I mentioned, the democratizing, right, of data, making data easy to find, making it easy to understand, really empowering, all of the stakeholders and the users to really make data-driven decisions by reducing the friction of being able to find that data. That third pillar, I would say, is trust. And this one is, I feel like, really come to the fore across the board, right? Trusting the data. I mean, data these days is being used more and more. And frankly, it's so important for so many kind of make it or break it decisions within organizations. Those decisions are being made by executives and business stakeholders. And if they can't trust the data, there could be really big ramifications, from monetary, ramifications for organizations to even to, ramifications to people's lives when decisions are made on untrustworthy data around things like, healthcare or disaster relief or, anything along those lines. So, we're seeing a lot of different tools emerging in this space. We're seeing kind of this renaissance in data governance tooling, which is awesome. You mentioned kind of all the data catalogs. We're seeing a lot of tools though around all of those three pillars, right? Things around compliance, right? So a lot of different privacy, permission and policy management tools, masking tools, classification tools, a lot of different tools, coming out around compliance. Around enablement, we're seeing different things like catalogs and lineage and semantic layers to better enable users to democratize that data. And from a trust perspective, there's a whole set of technologies out there around data profiling, cleansing, monitoring, quality testing, really ensuring that the data is in a good place to engender trust. And of course, there's, it's a really fast-moving, exciting space right now. It's really fun to be in it. We're seeing all sorts of, overlap and innovation happening. So, it's definitely something we're keeping on top of and continuing to watch.
All right. Well, that's a very comprehensive answer to.
Sorry, you get me talking sometimes.
But great. I mean, I think it makes sense, and totally the part that is important to cover, because there are just so many tools, because there's a lot of complex needs in this problems area. I would like this. Today's topic was more about data stewardship, and I picked this topic because it's the people that are inside the making this work. And I've also seen many times where customers have bought or implemented a tool and get to a point where, hey, it's actually not the tool, it's the people and the processes, and everyone actually just has to now do it. But getting people to do something is actually harder than a tool to do something.
Absolutely.
So I feel like this is a one big challenge post the tooling part. Obviously, there are a lot of things that tools can help, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about your take now on that people side, because I think that you guys also do very much more of that glue work in the client companies to actually make this going. So with that, what do you think is the top of mind for around data stewardship and the governance teams today?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so top of mind wise, so first of all, Shinji, totally agree with you here, right? I mean, I was, funny story where the bank we're working with just this week was asking us to help out with a big migration from one tool. It was a data catalog tool to a new data catalog tool for them. And the first thing we talked about is, right, well, so all right, great. So we want to try to scope out what this is going to take, and we're saying, all right, so what do you have in that first tool? Why are you moving to the second tool? And they said, oh, well, that first tool is, it's really not working for them, and it's really expensive. The tool just changed its pricing. And so as we kind of started delving into details, it turned out that, the reason why it wasn't working for them wasn't, look, there could be some reason why the tool wouldn't work for them. I'm not going to say it wasn't, but the real reason here was because they actually weren't using it correctly. They didn't do the stewardship. They didn't actually put all the information in the tool. They didn't deploy it correctly. And so, of course, without hydrating the data catalog with all of the right information, without having data stewards to do that, of course, it's not going to work for them. And so it ended up turning into a conversation really more about, okay, well, we can migrate you to this other tool, but we actually have to do it right and get the right people in place, the right processes in place to actually get the value you're looking to get out of this tool. You ask about what's top of mind for data stewards and data governance folks. I think every company we talk to, is in a different situation. Interestingly, I can talk briefly to a survey that we've been conducting. We've surveyed roughly, close to 100 different data governance, data stewardship leaders here over the last year. We've just really about what's top of mind for them. And obviously AI is the headline grabber right now. Everybody wants to talk about, AI and kind of the double-edged sword there. How to use AI to make it more efficient, make data governance and data stewardship more efficient. But, also critical is, how do you govern the data that you're going to be using for AI, right? How do you, manage the hallucinations by making sure that again, garbage in is garbage out, as we used to say back when I first got started. But these are rapidly evolving spaces. Right behind that, what we're hearing from a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders, frankly, is they're struggling to prove out the business value, to really convince their leadership and their executives to make the investments necessary for these, data governance and data stewardship programs to work. It's a constant battle for resources. Obviously, we're in a interesting, business economy right now where there's a lot of flux going on. Data governance is in many organizations a really lean program. Getting headcount and budgets is really challenging, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know what you've seen, Shinji, but from when you actually have a mature data governance program, it kind of fades into the background. It becomes when it's done really well, people kind of forget about the problems they had before it was done really well. And the fact is here that it's data governance and data stewardship. It's not something that you just, while there is, definitely a very a very big upfront lift. It's not something that you stop doing over time, right? This isn't a sprint. It's more like it's a constant. We gotta, you want to stay in shape. You got to keep going to the gym, and so justifying resources and budgets and headcount is definitely a challenge and something. I'd say
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is definitely one of the questions that I have for you that we'll definitely jump into. Maybe we can start from the basics here. How do you define data stewardship, and who are usually the data stewards in organizations?
Yeah, I mean, defining data stewardship. I think really data stewardship. I mean, if you just kind of look at the word here, steward. It's basically someone with responsibility. It's the responsibility for critical data elements, for key data assets. That for folks who are going to understand the business context and value. The fact of the matter is that there's a lot involved in data stewardship. Data steward who's doing their job right, they're wearing a lot of different hats. They are, data guardians, data evangelists, data quality managers, data policy enforcers. They're validators, they're documenters, they're consensus builders. There's probably a bunch of other different hats that I'm forgetting right now, but it's a big job. As far as who those people are, in most organizations, typically we're seeing, analysts or subject matter experts, SMEs from the business, from different business groups, being given that data stewardship task. In some more mature organizations, we will see people with kind of a data stewardship title, but it's still pretty rare right now.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen anyone that has a full-time title of data steward.
Right?
Usually it's not a title, it's a role or another thing that you are kind of assigned to do now. But like it happens because, do you think that's happening and needs to happen because they are producers of the data or main consumers of data? Like what makes like one analyst a data steward to another that's not?
Well, I think in general, the people who have the information and the authority to do the work of data steward, by definition, are really business people, right? Mm-hmm. Because the data stewardship, at the end of the day, anytime you're trying to do it from an IT perspective, it's not, you're coming at it from the wrong direction, right? It's a business person that has the business context. They understand the business value. They understand who should have access to it, how this is used. They're the ones who understand what should this data look like? What shouldn't it look like? What should be included? What shouldn't be included? So,
and when you say business people,
on the business side,
are you referring to like? Can you give me some example titles, like marketing managers or like salespeople or?
Oh yeah, I think in general you're going to have. I think what we're seeing is, analytics or kind of analytics management in each of the different business units. So if you have, for instance, like marketing analytics manager, or a sales analytics manager, or a financial, like a lead financial analyst, right? These are the folks that need to be the stewards of their domain of information, right? Maybe it's a supply chain analyst or whatnot. But absolutely, it needs to be those business people that have the business context and the business authority.
Yeah, and in many cases, they are the ones who care about the quality of data and all that, because they are the ones who needs to either provide analysis and most of the time make decisions based on that, or at least recommendations based on that analysis.
Absolutely. They've got the vested interest. Now, that being said, many times those people already have a full-time job, and they're being asked to do this on top of everything else that they're that they're supposed to be doing.
So Then tell us a little bit. I guess you've already explained why data stewardship is important, just to use the data. Why do you say it's important for data governance?
Well, I mean, you can really almost think of data stewardship as the other side of the coin to data governance, right? Data governance is a lot of policies and rules. Data stewardship is how it actually gets done, right? It's where the rubber meets the road. Without those data stewards to go in and bring that business context into into those processes, to be able to disseminate that, to enable all of the other stakeholders, without those data stewards to really see that the data quality is right or wrong, right? To be able to kind of provide a lot of context around what is the realm of values that we should be looking at here, right? And what does this make sense? What type of how do we define these specific business terms, and what do they mean? Without them being able to say, hey, here are the people who should have access, and here are the people who should be able to approve versus the people who need this to get approved, then data governance isn't going to work. It's just going to be a set of policies and rules that actually don't get enforced.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And when you look at it as a systematic high-level lens, it's very clear. Now, when you're talking to the data stewards to to give them all these new responsibilities that they didn't necessarily is not part of their day-to-day job, what are the things that you actually recommend on that communication front? Because maybe it's that part of the communication that companies might or teams might be starting off the wrong foot.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the interesting thing is, look, when you think about all the different roles that a data steward has, and then you go to some SME in one of the business units that says, hey, you're going to be our data steward. I think the assumption that person isn't already doing some of those things, at least, is in most cases is probably way off base, right? There's in most cases, even without delegating that data stewardship authority, a lot of this, somebody's got to be doing this in most cases. Somebody's got to be helping define some of this data. Somebody's going to be at least answering questions for other folks around what do these things mean. But I think that, it's very rare when we're seeing that those people are really doing the whole swath of what needs to be done as part of data stewardship. And I think what's really important here is, enabling data stewards, educating them, assisting them in the big lift, especially when you're starting to talk about rolling out a lot of these tools. Like rolling out a data catalog, there's a huge amount of metadata that needs to be brought in and needs to be populated inside of those tools, so that there's actually information in there that can be then used when people want to go say, hey, where is it that we where is it that this where is it that daily active users is defined, and which field should I use? Somebody's got to put that information in, and that's the data steward. So you need to enable them both with the resources to be able to kind of get all of that up and running. You need to be able to enable them with training in order so that they can best know what it is that they should and shouldn't be doing and how to do it, as well as the tooling to be able to make it easy and implement a lot of the data stewardship.
Yeah, that's a lot of work, and also corralling a lot of different people. So this is why these are initiatives and projects. And you have mentioned that regarding earlier communicating the value to the business or to the executives about data governance. Can you share a little bit about how data leaders what they can do, how they can frame to get more executive support for their stewardship programs? What are the things that you've seen that worked, and what are some of the outcomes that you would recommend data leaders to present to make a case that stewardship really drives business outcomes for the business?
Yeah. So I mean, this is a challenge everywhere right now. I think, where it's really, especially in, in today's business environment, linking data governance and data stewardship to, top line revenue growth or cost cutting and real strategic initiatives is really, it's difficult in many cases. We've seen it done. We're working with a health insurer that ended up having to pay 9-digit fines because of regulatory issues around how they were mishandling the data or not being able to produce the data, the right data and with the right data quality when asked for it by the government. And so from that perspective, suddenly the purse strings open. But that's not where anyone wants to be, paying those fines. I think what we're seeing is really, what we're seeing work is really trying to tie each individual business project, each individual domain to some sort of strategic initiative or some sort of, bigger revenue generating project, right? So for instance, we were working with a software company who was looking to kind of move from on-prem software into the cloud. And as part of that move, we tied in the data governance and the data stewardship into that, because suddenly it's like, okay, well now all of that customer data is going from on-prem at the customer to inside the customer's cloud. And so making sure that we had the right policies and security in place, making sure that the data quality was locked in, and then and that the data was trustworthy, and that we were enabling all of the end customers to be able to access their data and understand the data that they're getting was really critical. And so tying that into the strategic project of moving it into the cloud was a way that we were able to get resourcing there, right? I think there was another. We were working with a tech company, and for them it was really more about efficiency. They were in a situation where their data engineering team was spending probably close to 50% of their time responding to this data questions Slack channel.
Definitely heard of those.
Yeah, I mean, have you seen that?
We have a lot of customers that come to us because of those issues.
Right. Well, so when you have analysts and stakeholders spending their time going to Slack saying, "Hey, why is my revenue number look off?" And then so suddenly a data engineer has to take time away from updating data pipelines or creating new data flows and then go in and say, all right, so which revenue number are you looking at? And suddenly then there's this back and forth, and it's wasting the data engineer's time, it's wasting the stakeholders' time, it's slowing down the speed of business. And so just by saying, all right, well, you know what, let's roll out a catalog, let's go in and create a self-service infrastructure so that before we bother our we go directly to the data engineers asking questions, we can actually self-serve to ask those questions of the system. It cut down on that by 90%. I mean, it's hard to get to 100%, but it cut down on those on those instances by over 90%, and that was measurable efficiency, and you can assign real value to that. So on a case-by-case basis, what we we try to find the low-hanging fruit. We always try to find a specific, we try to start with one domain, one that's in a lot of pain, right? We're working with another client right now where they have a huge pain around their sales commissions. They have a lot of internal and external sales reps, and they keep asking about their sales commission there, and there's mistakes being made and incorrect data. And it's gotten to the point where some of the sales reps have threatened with lawsuits, and it's just, and so, coming in and saying, all right, let's come in and really do a good job stewarding this data, fixing the data trust, right? Enabling the end users in this case, which are actually the sales reps who just want to know, hey, where do I find my sales commission numbers and can I trust it, right? And then showing the impact of that and leveraging that and the value we're doing there, Once that's up and running, and now go to the finance people and say, hey, you guys are having problems too. Do you see what we did with the sales commission team? The marketing team says, hey, you know what, we're having problems trying to understand, different customer information. So using those as kind of use cases to say, hey, look, internal use cases to say, look at all the value here. There's a lot of value there. I don't know. What have you seen, Shinji, as far as being able to communicate the value to stakeholders?
Yeah, I really like that approach of attaching it to a specific project that's happening within the organization, especially when it's a strategic project, or could stem out from a very specific issue that a team, like sales team example that you just mentioned, is facing. A lot of the time, as a data catalog and governance platform vendor, most of the time what we see is more on that second example that you mentioned, regarding either the data team is spending too much time answering ad hoc questions. There are no shortage of questions coming from the business. It is frustrating on both sides, from the business and on the data team. They want to make sure that everyone is supported at the same time, just like sheer amount of time and effort. Like when data teams end up in a position where they cannot do any horizontal, more productive, more forward-looking projects, it is very demoralizing, and sometimes it becomes a main reasons why some people in the data team churn. And whenever that happens, there's a ton of deficit of tribal knowledge that the person has hold, and without a system that can actually act as the main source of truth, it actually makes the whole like data team unstable. So I think that's the main part that we see the most, and the areas where the heads of data makes a decision that this is an important part that we have to work on, like in this quarter or in this year, to ensure that we are actually more productive and can support our business at the pace that they want to move forward with.
That's a really good point, right? That your team morale and employee retention on your data teams is such a big deal, and that's another value driver here. A couple of years ago, we were working with a media company that they had this problem. Three analysts would show up in every meeting with 3 different Tableau reports, each for a different value for daily active users, and they spent the entire meeting every time arguing over who had the right number and not actually being able to make any impact on the business. And because of this happening over and over and over again, basically their entire data analytics team and data science team, with the exception of 1 or 2 people, they basically all quit over the course of like 6 months because there was just nothing to do. And we ended up having to come in and work with their data engineering team to try to go in and fix, a lot of this data trust and data enablement issues. And it was a big job, especially when suddenly most of the analytics and most of those SMEs had already left.
Yeah. I can imagine the pain that was loaded to the data team left. Well, that gives us a good segue to kind of our core meat of the topic that I really want to talk about, which is implementation of data stewardship. I know you've alluded to it a little bit before. Qbiz takes this approach domain by domain in order to implement stewardship. I would love to have you touch upon that a little bit. And I would love to have you explain a little bit more about when you walk into a new domain, what's your first step? What does your assessment look like? And how do you design the program so that the data stewardship is in a good place?
Yeah. Well, so no, absolutely. We strongly we're strong proponents of this domain by domain approach, right? You don't want to come in and boil the ocean. You don't want to try to do too much all at once. You want to really prove out the value of what you're doing. And as I mentioned before, really, hold that up and hold the value and the accomplishments there is up to really help gain momentum, to get that buy-in from a lot of the other teams, gain those kind of proponents, those advocates. show that, show where it's being done right and how it's really impacting the business there will really, it really helps kind of open the gates to more reticent business units and domains to put more skin in the game there. So your other question was around, how do you get started, I guess?
Yeah. When you walk into a new domain, you decided to start with, let's say, marketing department. What's your first step? What does your initial assessment look like? And if you can share a little bit more about, like, you would probably get a lot of people in the room. How do you ensure that everyone is starting to agree on the definition and ownership? Because even within the domain, I'm sure there are different types of SMEs that you are going to have to work with.
Yeah. I mean, look, as you said early on, right? It's not just tooling, and it's not just data catalogs and data lineage and that. It's people and process, and people and process can definitely be messy sometimes. But you're right. The first thing we do is start out with an assessment, right? We identify, we start trying to do inventories of what are the critical data elements, how are they used, is there consensus on the definitions? We want to identify who are the key stakeholders in that domain. What are all of the analytic workflows? Because as you mentioned, there are typically a lot more than one analyst, and there's a lot more than one stakeholder, even in a specific domain. So we really want to try to understand and then prioritize, those key critical data elements, those analytical workflows. What are they using the data for from a business perspective, right? Again, this is not, I think you lose a lot of people. You lose a lot of people, and you lose a lot of that buy-in, the resources when you start talking technically about things like just data catalogs or critical data elements or any type of nomenclature, right? We want to really talk to people from business perspective, around what is it that you're trying to achieve, and what types of analytics do you need? What kind of information do you need to achieve those things, right? So we really want to assess that and get an understanding in the domain, right? Building out what we like to call that kind of data governance framework, that charter around what are we trying to achieve and how are we trying to achieve it. Start putting, the other thing is that there aren't hard and fast black and white lines in many cases between business units and between domains. And so we want to, it's a grayscale here. And so we want to really try to make sure that we are putting some bounds around that initial domain and saying, all right, so this is what's going to be included, and this is what we're going to focus on first. And here's that business impact that we're trying to have, right? We're going to look then at, where is all of the data, and, is it in multiple places? How clean is it? Is there a single place to go to find it? Are there multiple different copies? We're going to be looking at things like, what does the data quality look like? Are we in this situation where we have, multiple different versions of the same, calculation, right? We're working with a home automation company, and the Treasury Department has one definition for number of new sales, and the the parts department has another definition of new sales, and the customer success department has another number for new sales, and they're all coming from different systems. So being able to kind of understand what's there and start looking at creating some consensus, start defining what do these business what do these business concepts really mean?
Yeah. I think those are all good examples and the actual conversations that happens in the room. Now, as someone who is, let's say, planning to kick off a stewardship program, how should they think about, like, when people go into these disagreements? Are there any types of framework that you use or working models that you've seen that really helps driving alignment across teams?
I mean, as I said, people are sometimes messy, right? There's, people have different, they have different viewpoints. They have, they're coming from different perspectives. They have different, personal and professional goals. So, trying to drive alignment on some of these can sometimes be, extremely challenging, right? I think, to that end, I think that there's a number of things that we've seen work, right? Obviously, first is just trying to get working committees and trying to keep those working committees as small as you possibly can, and make sure that they're facilitated. I think it definitely helps to bring in kind of a disinterested third party to facilitate those conversations, to be able to be separate from any of the kind of perspectives that those other people are coming from, and help, bring in, experience with, varied experience and varied tools from other industries, as well as other organizations, as far as what's worked in the past. So, helping kind of find those compromises and brainstorm ways to, create interesting naming conventions and to find, win-win type of scenarios. We also see, even though you want to start, I think, with one domain, you do also want to create kind of that data governance program. And I think that there's some, where you're kind of looking at it from the overall full business perspective. And what we've seen really work fairly well is, creating kind of data governance councils, or really more, data governance forums, where you have people from a lot of different, different stakeholders, different data stewards from a lot of the different domains, kind of coming together on a regular basis to kind of discuss, create a lot of structures around how to get past, different disagreements, and to help mitigate and discuss those and try to find solutions.
Okay. So then I guess, is there kind of like would you say like, I mean, because like, it's not like we have hundreds of people and unlimited budget. Most of the time, like, you have to work on a very limited budget and resources. What would be like a minimal viable way, like, that you recommend to start this? Like, at least how many people to drive the governance program, especially just around implementing stewardship?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, every organization's different, right? And it's going to depend a lot on what the organization's goals are, the organization size, what their current, their current state is from an overall enablement, data trust, and data compliance perspective. What industry they're in also makes a big difference, right? Things like financial services and healthcare, you really need to focus a lot more on compliance in certain areas. But not, it is an issue in across every industry. I think, again, that's another reason to go domain by domain. I think that starting with an initial domain, you're going to have someone who's already, in most cases, I guess, we're seeing that there's already somebody on the business side, some subject matter expert who's probably already doing some of the, taking some of the weight of that data stewardship. So I think the first case there is to go in and get buy-in from their management to really free up some of their time to take it on, it might not even need to be full-time depending on the size of the domain, but to take it on at least half-time, and actually to have that half-time role as the data steward for that domain. And then it's really about investing in some enablement and education for them, as well as some tooling for them to, do all of that. Now, that being said, as I think I mentioned before, look, over the long term, and once you've gotten to steady state, there's always going to be work that needs to be done. You always need to keep going back to the gym and keeping in shape. But it isn't as big of a lift over the long term. But up front, there is a pretty big upfront lift, to define a lot of the processes, to define the role-based access, and the security, and who should, who should have access or not, all the compliance information to ensure that the data is trustworthy, right? And so from that from that perspective, we also need to get buy-in from leadership to do that upfront lift. And
Of course.
maybe that's kind of dedicating that data steward, again, depending on the size. Maybe that's getting that person some short-term assistance to get all of the build out all of the data glossaries and define and validate all of the lineage and get all of that context into your data governance tools, your data catalogs.
I guess like where my question was coming from was around how do you recommend data governance leaders when they are requesting for these time from SMEs and maybe additional resources? How long of a, like, I guess, project do you typically see these things usually take, as just kind of to really just to show what it would look like in a time frame? As an example of, like, let's say we work with one domain and you're trying to get to good state.
Yeah. I mean, if you just want, I guess what I would say on that is, it's really varied, but I think it's measured in months, in certain cases for pretty simple domains where you have the right level of support and you have maybe some upfront help. Maybe you can do it in a month or two. In other cases, it could take, 3 or 4 maybe. And maybe in some cases it takes longer, right? And again, it also depends on things like, how hard is it going to be to get consensus, right? We were working, I'll tell you an example. We were working with a gig working company, and they were, their executives were getting all these questions around, are they paying their gig workers minimum wage? And so they came back to their data team and said, well, what is the effective hourly rate that we're paying our people? And they didn't actually have the data right at that point to support it. And so we ended up spending, they asked us to come in and help with that. And we ended up spending probably the first couple of months in getting them those answers, frankly, just going in and having meetings with people, talking about all of the different, resolving a lot of the different corner cases and reasoning around the business rules around it, right? When you have a driver who accepted a ride, but is sitting in front of a Starbucks and doesn't move for 10 minutes to go and pick up the rider, are those 10 working minutes or are they not 10 working minutes? When you have a driver who got a flat tire halfway through a ride and the rider has to call another ride while the driver's waiting for a tow truck, are those working minutes? Are those not working minutes? And so just having a lot of those conversations and discussions and resolving all of those different corner cases, that took a lot longer than we were expecting.
Yeah, I feel like it's that how to scope and make a clear business definition so that it can be translated into data that you are confident on.
What do you see when you guys, from a catalog perspective, when folks are implementing a domain, what do you see on that?
Yeah, as always, it depends. But I would say it really kind of comes down to whether there is a dedicated effort or not. And if there is someone who's dedicated to make this work, most of the time, I think a lot of the times they can really try to make it work in a month or so. But most of the time, what we see is 3 to 6 months because they are taking it as more part-time. They have to coordinate with, like you mentioned, a lot of different departments, business analysts to ensure the documentations are checked and the tags and collections look like a good structure. And they are actually, at the end of the day, the litmus test before you decide to roll out to everyone the data catalog or not is how quickly can you actually answer a lot of these questions that you're getting day to day? And can you have the stakeholders to use the tool to answer their own questions? And this is a test that you can start putting in from day one. And depending on how well it was documented and how well it was structured, like you'll see it failing right away if you don't have any of those, versus when you are starting to add these effort. And I think it is actually a virtuous cycle, because the SMEs and the data stewards actually see it working, and it's actually answering questions better, so on and so forth. But it still requires them to actually just monitor it and put a little bit more of that effort to ensure that it's working correctly.
Now, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to go to the next topic. We have about 5 minutes left, which is like, I want to talk about AI agents.
That's where I was going as well.
Yeah, I know that this is like an area that we both are very excited about. So we'd love to hear kind of how you see AI agents supporting rather than like replacing data stewards, especially around this like areas on quality checks or documentation. Like, what are the maybe if you can give us some examples of how you deployed the agents in the past in implementing data governance?
Well, I mean, it's a really good segue here, right? Because what I was going to say was that when we talk about how long does this whole thing take, right? What's interesting is that a lot of the all the newest data catalog tools and they're really they're being built really well, and they're being built that can get set up really quick. We're not talking about months there, we're talking about weeks or less, just ingesting, just quickly ingesting and connecting to all the different sources. Though that's fast. The slow part, and the reason why we're saying it takes months, is, again, as you mentioned, it's really getting all of that human information, right? All of that knowledge out of people's brains and into the tools, and so that has been what slowed things down. So we're doing a lot of really exciting things with AI agents these days, and there's a lot of opportunity for AI agents on multiple sides of the data governance thing. So from a data stewardship perspective, we've been building AI agents that will actually go out and crawl the data and make a bunch of and summarize a lot just by looking at the data, and create a lot of that metadata to say, hey, here's what this is, here's what it means, here's what the realm of value should be, here's to be able to kind of create a lot of that content so that the data steward doesn't have to. Not only can we crawl the data, but we can crawl a lot of documentation within the with internal to the enterprise, whether you're using Confluence or SharePoint or any of those, to really pull out a lot of that information and really start creating some of those some of that context that in the past we've had to manually put in place, right? So now that being said, you can't trust it without that human in the loop. And so, but what that does is it drastically decreases kind of a lot of the manual effort that the steward has to do. It gives them a starting point where now, instead of having to go in and figure out what this is, now we've got a lot of content generated that then the steward can go in and validate and check and say, yes, these 9 are right, but this 10, that 10th one looks a little bit weird, and let me just focus on that one, and then be able to then automatically import that in to the to the data stewardship tooling suite, right? So we're seeing that a lot. We're also building out a lot of there's a lot of great data quality tools out there, but there's also the ability to go in and use agents to do a lot of anomaly checking and being able to make sure that we're coming in with advanced data quality checks using AI agents to do that. What we're also seeing, we're working with.
Is that more like agents to decide, depending on how the data looks like, which factors of data quality they should monitor?
Absolutely. And on the flip side of things, right, we're also seeing that there's a number of stakeholders, and we're working with a fintech company right now, big fintech company, around integrating agents with their actual data catalogs and data governance tools as well. So now, instead of somebody having to go to Slack to ask a data engineer, hey, where do I find this data? And without having to go learn a new tool, and come in and try to figure out what that, where things are in the data catalog, they can literally ask the AI agent, hey, I'm looking for the revenue metric that would have, for these type of for these type of products, where do I find this and how is this calculated? And then the agent will actually go pull that information and tell it and give it back so they can just go and quickly move on with their day without having to bother a human or to learn a bunch of new tooling. So there's a lot of, this is again a fast evolving space, and there's a lot of places that we're experimenting with a lot of different new agents there. So in fact, pretty much every project we're doing with clients right now, we're finding opportunities to integrate agents into the into the workflow.
Yeah, it is definitely next big thing that is that we're all taking a step towards. I'm quite excited about the future of AI. It's not like there's going to be definitely less and less that we might have to actually do the work, but rather really just checking what AI has produced is good, and also making sure the flow and the framework, like we're all kind of starting to approach this in a systematic angle, which I think is a very interesting movement in the industry.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I will say this: we're not getting rid of humans. We're just trying to make it easier for humans here, right? AI isn't going to make that decision around what's a working minute or or which value for new sales should we be using for a specific use case. That right now, at least not no time soon, at least that right now we need humans to be able to kind of make those decisions. But how we can kind of streamline that process and help them kind of make those decisions and then propagate those decisions throughout the enterprise's decision-making process is
for sure
seeing it.
So as you look ahead, I guess we talked a lot, somewhat about agents. Are there any opportunities for innovation that you see in data stewardship or governance in the future?
Unfortunately, I think that there's a huge amount of opportunity in the future, because we're seeing that despite the best intentions, many companies out there aren't doing the best job right now on data governance. Data keeps getting more and more complex, so there's a huge opportunity of every organization to improve their tooling, their processes, to improve their enablement for their end users, and to improve the trust in their data. If you're thinking kind of big picture, I think that we're seeing so many new vendors and tools out there. There are at this point, dozens, if not multiple dozens, of categories of data governance and data stewardship tools on the marketplace, with more coming out all the time. So, we're seeing, I think that AI is going, AI capabilities within those tools, as those tools start, building out more automations and more AI inside of the tools, it's going to become table stakes. And I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation. We're seeing a lot of the big players in the marketplace right now starting to focus over the last year in data governance, right? With Databricks, with Unity Catalog, and Microsoft with rebuilding Purview and investing a lot there with Snowflake and Horizon and all of these other tools from the big players. And I think they're investing a lot. A lot of the smaller players are doing a lot of really innovative things and keeping ahead of the curve. When we're talking and we're looking at all of these different tools out there, and a lot of folks are like, well, wait, where do we even start? What we're seeing is still the inertia in data governance and data stewardship today is around data catalogs still. And that's really where all of these are kind of coming in as a kind of a central hub. And so, we're seeing probably in the market, we're expecting a lot of consolidation in the market in kind of bringing a lot of kind of some of those disparate compliance, enablement, and trust capabilities into the data catalog space, whether that's through development, organic, growth of those data catalogs, or through, acquisitions and mergers. We see that as a big focus right now. The other thing I'd say is, and again, this goes back to kind of enabling data stewards, is the idea of the concept of shifting left in kind of the workflows to make sure that you're empowering and enabling your developers, giving them the tools and the methodologies to tag the data earlier on in that kind of data supply chain, that data workflow, so that that flows through all of the systems. And so some of those things are auto-populated and take some of the weight off of the data stewards, and having them kind of flow all the way through the workflow. So I think that's another area where we're seeing those that metadata propagated and really enabling your enablers there.
Yeah, those are both really good points. I think you touched upon like most of the things that I was thinking about. With MCP, I think the way that AI agents can interact with each other through an more of the interface that is quote unquote standard. And once we get to a point where, it's regardless of the integration, you can ask the same question and get answers right away, it's going to unlock a lot of value for enterprises. So that's something that I'm excited about.
Absolutely. That protocol is making it so easy to build out agentic applications now that we're going to be seeing a massive, they're going to pop up everywhere. And definitely, I think it's going to have a big impact on the data stewardship process to hopefully make things faster and easier and more accurate.
Yeah, for sure. Well, with that, we can close the episode here. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being here. I really learned a lot and enjoyed the conversation today.
No, I enjoyed it as well.
So thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you later.
Yep. Thanks for having me.